My sister hijacked my graduation party mic, humiliated me with lies, then months later was dragged from court in handcuffs, screaming my name. My sister Claudia has been mean to me for as long as I can remember. When we were kids, she cut the head off my favorite stuffed bunny while staring me straight in the eye and remarked, "Well, now it's realistic. Bunnies die." If I ever got new clothes, she would borrow them without asking, return them dirty or stretched out, and laugh at my tears. My mother gave me a necklace for my 10th birthday that I had been wanting for months. The very next day, Claudia flushed it down the toilet during an argument and then gaslit me with, "You probably lost it. You're always careless. School was even worse." She would create stories about me, tell embarrassing lies to my crushes, and insult me in front of her friends. If I received decent grades, she'd accuse me of attempting to make her look stupid. If I struggled with something, Mom would tell everyone that I was slow. My parents consistently dismissed it as sibling rivalry. The standard, "You two need to get along. One day, you'll only have each other's speech." But I quickly discovered that my sister did not want to get along. She wanted me to feel embarrassed and humiliated. By the time high school came along, I had mastered the art of staying out of her way, but she kept digging at me. When I joined the debate team and began winning competitions, she insulted me as a desperate nerd attempting to appear important. When I was accepted to my ideal institution, she sneered, "Don't get too excited. You'll probably fail and come back." I was really looking forward to my high school graduation celebration. It wasn't only about the party. It was about finally appreciating something I'd worked for without Claudia in the spotlight. My parents agreed to let me host it in our backyard. I invited friends, instructors, and extended relatives. I spent weeks planning it, with fairy lights, a taco bar, and a music that I spent hours creating. Of course, Claudia was upset about it. She began with passive-aggressive statements. Why did she have a lavish party? I didn't receive one. She did, although she did not enjoy parties back then. It's only high school. Nobody cares. I'm going to be extremely bored that day. I told her straight up, "If you can't be nice, just stay out of the way." She smirked and added, "Don't worry. I'll make it memorable." That should have been my warning. Everything began out well on the celebration day. Then Claudia made her move. First, she turned up the music to ear-splitting levels and began playing songs she knew I detested. When I ordered her to stop, she said loudly to my guests, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize the party dictator was here." Then when everyone was eating, she inadvertently spilled Coke all over the dessert table, ruining the cake, cupcakes, and fruit display I had worked so hard on. She fake apologized in the most sarcastic tone possible. "Oops, my bad. Guess we'll have to diet today." But the worst thing happened afterward. Claudia took the microphone for the speech I had not asked her to give while I was conversing with my old English teacher. She began recounting humiliating things about me, some exaggerated, others just made up. Examples include, one time she peed her pants in middle school. She once cried for an hour because I ate her cookie. Don't worry, she's going to be a great college student if she can survive without Mom packing her lunch. Everyone laughed awkwardly, but I could feel my cheeks burning. I tried to take the microphone, but she yanked it away. That was when I snapped. I told her to go. She rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, it's just a joke. God, you're so sensitive." She walked away, but the harm had been done. The mood of the celebration was ruined. People kept attempting to console me, but all I could think was, she did it again. She couldn't let me have this one day. After that, I stopped speaking with her totally. I didn't respond to her texts, calls, or snarky apology, which simply said, "Sorry if you took it the wrong way." For the following 6 months, she tried to behave as if nothing happened. At family dinners, she'd sit next to me and ask about school as if we were closest friends. If I ignored her, she'd say, "Wow, still holding a grudge? You need to get over it." Then, over Thanksgiving, she made one last dig. "You're acting like I ruined your wedding or something. It was just a high school party." I gave her a straight face and responded, "It was my celebration. You ruined it on purpose. You've been tearing me down my whole life, and I'm done giving you access to me, and I intended it." I stopped inviting her to my events. I exited family group chats and informed my parents, "If she's there, I'm not." Naturally, the guilt tripping began right away. My mother called last week and said Claudia was ready to talk. She put her on speaker mode without telling me, and Claudia's first words were, "So, are you done being dramatic?" I hung up right away and tossed my phone across the room, where it bounced off my dorm wall. My hands shook as I took it back up and blocked Claudia's number for the 15th time this week. 20 minutes later, my roommate knocked on my door, holding her laptop and wearing a strange expression. She showed me her Instagram messages, and there were 3 new profiles, all made within the last hour, sending her walls of text about how I was mentally ill and needed assistance. The usernames were made up of random integers, but the writing style was entirely Claudia. My roommate watched as I took screenshots of everything and saved them in the evidence folder I'd created on my laptop. The next morning in the cafeteria, she sat across from me and moved her plate away. She inquired if any of Claudia's claims were real, and I could tell she wasn't sure what to trust. I took out my phone and showed her the video Elisa had taken at my graduation party, which included Claudia's entire speech and my attempt to grab the microphone. Her expression changed from bewildered to scared as she watched. She stated my sister was very messed up and asked whether I had told anyone about it. That afternoon, I walked to the college counseling center and stood outside for 10 minutes before finally entering. The receptionist handed me an intake form, and I sat there staring at the section on family connections. There was a checkbox for familial trauma, and I hovered my pen over it for a minute before marking it. 3 days later, I was sitting in Dr. Moreau's office telling her about the plush bunny and how Claudia had looked me in the eyes while ripping off its head. I told her about the jewelry in the toilet, the graduation party, and everything else. She listened without interrupting, then said something that made my entire body feel lighter. She stated that what I had experienced was not sibling rivalry, but rather systematic emotional abuse. That night, Albert discovered me crying in the common room after my father left me a voicemail about how I was pulling the family apart. He sat down next to me, and I eventually told him everything from the beginning. He held me as I described 20 years of being ripped down and humiliated. He said, "No wonder you flinch when people raise their voices." Later that week, I was alone in my room going through old family photos on my laptop. Claudia was either smirking at the camera or doing something to injure me that appeared to be playful but was actually not. She was tugging my hair, grabbing my arm, or treading on my foot as everyone else smiled for the picture. How come no one noticed what was going on right in front of them? A week later, I was studying when someone began hammering on my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, with Claudia directly behind her. My mother said we'd speak it out like grown-ups and began pushing past me toward my room. I blocked the doorway and told them to go, but Claudia screamed that I was overly emotional and selfish. My RA heard the commotion and dashed down the hallway. She inquired whether everything was fine, and I informed her that these folks needed to leave. Claudia began yelling, claiming she was my sister and had every right to be there. Campus security arrived within minutes and led them both out, while Claudia yelled the entire time about how I was ruining everything. The next day, I met with University Legal Services, who assisted me in filing paperwork for a no trespass order. The council emphasized that if Claudia's behavior worsened further, I could be eligible for a restraining order. That evening, Elisa called from home, seeming fatigued. She said Claudia had been telling everyone I'd suffered a mental breakdown in college and was fabricating tales for publicity. Several people we knew from high school had contacted Elisa, asking what was going on. Elisa had been defending me, but she admitted it was getting more difficult because Claudia was so convincing. 2 weeks later, I returned to Dr. Moreau's office, and she handed me a stack of articles about narcissistic abuse. Everything made sense when I read about gaslighting, public humiliation, and how abusers always act the victim when confronted. I wasn't crazy, nor was I being overly sensitive. I was angry, and for the first time, it felt like the appropriate answer. 2 days later, I was sitting in economics class when my phone rang with a call from my father. I left it on voicemail and listened to it after class, his voice exhausted, as he told that Claudia had been crying for weeks and that her therapist had advised family reunification was critical to healing. I understood the manipulation right away, yet it still made my chest tight. Albert approached me at the library that afternoon and proposed we resolve my social media issues once and for all. We spent 4 hours in his dorm room building new accounts with fictitious names and maximum privacy settings, barring everyone who might be connected to Claudia. Her pals, anyone from high school who could leak information. I wonder what Claudia's thinking when she performs these things. Ripping the bunny's head off while staring at her sister appears overly deliberate for a child. Each block seemed like another brick in the wall between me and my former existence. Midterms and papers kept me busy for weeks, and before I knew it, it was almost Thanksgiving. My parents had been calling regularly, promising Claudia that she would be at her boyfriend's family dinner in Chicago and that I would safely return home. Despite my instincts screaming at me, I drove the 3 hours home, assuring myself it would be all right for just 2 days. I froze as I stepped in the front door with my overnight luggage, seeing Claudia sitting at the dining room table with her familiar sneer. My mother appeared from the kitchen, stating we needed to hash this out as a family. I turned around without saying anything, got back in my car, and went directly to Aunt Susan's house, 20 minutes away. Susan opened the door in her jammies, obviously astonished to see me standing there with my suitcase, but she drew me in and made coffee while I sat at her kitchen table. Over store-bought pumpkin pie, I told her everything, beginning with the graduation celebration and progressing back through years of agony. Her expression darkened with each anecdote until she eventually set down her fork and stated that she had always wondered why I was so silent at family gatherings. The travel back to college was lengthier due to holiday traffic. And when I got to my dorm room at midnight, I saw that my door was slightly open, despite the fact that I had secured it. Nothing was stolen, yet everything was incorrect. My diary was on a different shelf, my laptop was open when I had left it closed, and my dresser drawers were not fully closed. My skin crawled as I examined each nook, looking for minor clues that someone had touched everything. Campus security took a report, but without proof of forced entry or larceny, they could only offer increased patrols. 3 days later, I returned to Dr. Moreau's office to describe the incident, and she assisted me in recognizing the pattern of escalation in Claudia's behavior, explaining that losing control over me was making her frantic. We spent the hour developing a comprehensive safety plan that included emergency contact information, documentation tactics, and particular routines for various eventualities. I was heading back from that appointment when my phone alerted me to an email from an unfamiliar address. The mail included old Instagram photographs that I removed months ago, modified to appear compromising, with my face superimposed onto other bodies in provocative postures. Although the content was brief, Claudia's writing style was instantly apparent in her threat to send them to my teachers. I went straight to campus police, who took the blackmail threat seriously and called up a detective who specialized in cybercrime. She stated that blackmail was a felony and that they could track IP addresses, officially launching an inquiry that afternoon with case numbers and evidence logs. A week later, I was studying in the library when my mother called, distraught and yelling that Claudia had told her I was attempting to have her arrested for nothing. She requested that I drop the charges immediately, claiming that I was wrecking my sister's future due to minor sibling squabbles, but I hung off while she was still speaking. Albert had been watching everything unfold and discussed my issue with his folks during their weekly video conversation. His mother, who worked as a social worker, encouraged me to spend winter break with them at their home near Cleveland. When I visited at their house 2 weeks later, his mother sat with me in the living room and softly validated what I'd gone through, marking the first time an adult had taken my side without making excuses for Claudia or attempting to reconcile. When I returned to university after winter break, the nightmares began immediately away. I'd have dreams of Claudia standing at my dorm room doorway, sitting in the back of my courses, or waiting outside my job at the campus bookstore. The dreams were so genuine that I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I had to check my door lock 3 or 4 times before I could even consider going back to sleep. My roommate began to question my well-being since I would get up several times each night to ensure the door was closed and the windows were fastened. The lack of sleep made things difficult, but I couldn't stop myself from double-checking everything. 2 weeks into the semester, Elisa texted me a slew of screenshots that made my stomach drop. Claudia had been emailing all of our high school pals on Facebook with a completely made-up story about how I had stolen money from our parents and developed drug problems in college. She claimed that I had been begging family members for money to maintain my habits, which was why I had cut her off. Most people who knew me didn't believe it, Elisa remarked. However, I noticed from the screenshots that some individuals were starting to ask questions and wonder if there was any truth to it. I was sitting in the library trying to focus on my chemistry homework when my phone called with an unfamiliar number. It was the detective who had been managing my case, and he had some news that made me drop my head on the desk. They traced the blackmail emails I'd been receiving to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Claudia's apartment. The security camera showed her sitting there with her laptop at the exact times the emails were sent, and the investigator stated that they now had sufficient evidence to proceed with charges. The next day, I met with the prosecutor at the courthouse downtown, and she explained what would happen next. She stated that Claudia would be arrested, followed by an arraignment in which she would enter a plea, and they would most likely offer her a deal because this was her first violation. Then she looked at me and uttered what I had been dreading. 3 days later, I was in my economics class when my phone started vibrating nonstop. I came out into the hallway and noticed 5 missed calls from my mother. When I called back, she was shouting so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She continued telling me I was evil, that I was destroying our family, and that I couldn't be her daughter if I could do this. My father then took the phone and spoke in a cold and flat tone. A week later, I sat in the rear row of the courtroom, Albert to one side and Dr. Moreau to the other. My palms shook as I watched them carry Claudia in for arraignment. She pled not guilty, as the prosecutor had warned me would happen, and the judge freed her on bail with a no-contact order, which meant she couldn't approach me or speak with me in any way. As she went out of the courtroom with her lawyer, she turned and stared directly at me, mouthing something I could hear clearly from across the room. Aunt Susan contacted me that afternoon as I was walking back to my dorm. She'd been conducting her own research, speaking with cousins and other family members I hadn't seen in years. Claudia turned found to have been unkind to several of them, particularly the younger relatives. However, everyone was too terrified or embarrassed to say anything. Susan was compiling a pattern of behavior dating back to when we were young children, documenting everything individuals remembered. The stress of everything made it tough to concentrate on schoolwork. Despite knowing about the no-contact order, I would sit in class continually looking over my shoulder to see whether Claudia was present. My chemistry grade went from an A to a C in 3 weeks, and I couldn't focus long enough to read more than a page of any textbook. Dr. Moreau formally diagnosed me with PTSD at one of our sessions and suggested we meet twice a week to help me cope with everything. 2 weeks after the arraignment, I was doing laundry in my dorm basement when I checked my phone and noticed 3 new voicemails from my mother's number. My heart began beating because I sensed something was wrong. Mom never left voicemail messages. When I played the first one, I didn't hear Mom's voice. The prosecutor added witness intimidation charges the next morning when I handed her the voicemails. She played them for the court at an emergency hearing that afternoon, and he promptly revoked Claudia's bail. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching through the glass doors as 2 officers carried my sister away in handcuffs, her hands tied behind her back. I waited for remorse, sadness, or something to hit me, but all I felt was relief, like if I could finally breathe again after weeks. The next morning, a courier knocked on my dorm room door and delivered a hefty envelope from Brennan, Hayes & Associates, Columbus's most expensive law firm. My hands shook as I opened it and read the formal letter advising me to reconsider my position and warning me against irreversibly breaking family relationships, as well as implying that I could face legal action for defamation. Albert found me sitting on my bed 20 minutes later, still holding the letter, and promptly phoned the prosecutor's office while I sat there, motionless. The prosecution urged us not to worry because this was standard intimidation techniques, but I couldn't stop thinking about how my parents were spending thousands of dollars to protect the person who had been hurting me my whole life. A week later, Dr. Moreau set aside her entire afternoon to assist me in writing my victim impact statement, and each sentence felt like tearing glass out of my flesh. I wrote about the stuffed bunny, the Flushing necklace, the botched graduation party, and all the minor cuts in between that built up to 20 years of misery. She helped me find the words when I couldn't, sitting quietly as I cried through chapters describing how Claudia not only stole my childhood, but also attempted to destroy my future. That same week, Albert's mother called and officially welcomed me to stay with them for the summer, claiming their guest room was already set up and ready for me. Claudia went from cruel sister to criminal mastermind faster than someone failing chemistry class, which now appears to include our narrator, thanks to all of this drama. Breaking into dorms, making phony pictures, and committing coffee shop crimes. She sat with me in their kitchen and told me about her sister's decision to cut off toxic family members years ago, and how chosen family may be stronger than blood. And I accepted their offer, feeling as if I had finally found firm ground after months of tremors. Elisa had to testify in a deposition the next Tuesday, so she brought the video from my graduation party on her phone and showed it frame by frame to the prosecutor and Claudia's lawyer. The prosecutor contacted me later to say that was strong proof of a pattern of public humiliation and targeted harassment, particularly the point where Claudia seized the microphone as I tried to stop her. 2 weeks later, I was helping Albert's mother prepare dinner when we heard a hammering on the front door and my mother yelling that she knew I was inside. Albert's mother instructed me to remain in the kitchen while she answered the door, but I could hear everything as Marlene pushed past her and demanded to see me. When I walked into the living room, Marlene's face turned scarlet, yelling about Claudia going to prison and asking if that was what I wanted, my own sister in prison. When I didn't respond or move closer to her, she crossed the room in 3 steps and slapped me hard across the face, the sound reverberating throughout the home. Albert's mother quickly got out her phone and dialed 911, while Marlene continued to yell at me about family loyalty and how I was destroying everything. Within 10 minutes, the police arrived and arrested Marlene for assault, while I stood there with Albert's mother's arm around me, my cheeks still burning. I had to submit another police report at the station, and the detective informed me that family violence frequently worsens during legal proceedings, which did not make me feel any better about having to witness my own mother being handcuffed. The next day, I returned to my old home while my parents were at work to pack the few items I wanted to save. I sat in my former bedroom for the final time, gazing at every object and recalling how Claudia had smashed my jewelry box, torn my posters, stolen my diary, and read it aloud to her friends. I left the majority of it behind, taking only a few photos and my old debate medals before locking the door on that room and my life forever. A month later, the prosecutor called to inform me that Claudia had been offered a plea deal consisting of 2 years probation, required therapy, and a permanent restraining order, which I considered reasonable. But Claudia refused, insisting on going to trial because she wanted a chance to give her side of the tale. The prosecution said that narcissists frequently do this because they want to perform. They seek attention and the opportunity to play the victim in front of an audience. 3 days after our talk, a parcel addressed to me arrived at Albert's residence with no return address. Inside was my old plush bunny from when I was 5. Claudia had pulled the head off, and it was now badly put back together with black thread. The note simply stated, "Fixed it for you," and was signed Mom. However, it felt more like a threat than an apology or peace offering. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan had been discreetly documenting whatever she could find, rummaging through old boxes in my parents' attic and compiling a timeline spanning 20 years. She discovered elementary school report cards with teacher remarks regarding my withdrawn and anxious behavior with my sister. I found my old journals, which I assumed were lost. I found images of me flinching away from Claudia as a toddler. The pattern had always existed, scrawled in a dozen different handwritings by instructors, counselors, and coaches who had all sensed something was amiss but had never quite joined the dots. 2 months later, I decided to start something on campus that I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I reserved a tiny room at the student center and distributed brochures promoting a support group for persons who had experienced family abuse. The first meeting, I sat with my notebook and 3 seats arranged in a circle, watching the door and wondering if anyone would show up. A female named Ashley strolled in first, followed by a guy named Ben and another girl simply known as Kay. We sat for an hour, mostly looking at each other. However, at the end, Ashley was crying about her stepfather, and Ben was talking about his elder brother, who used to lock him in closets. By the 4th meeting, we had 12 participants and needed to move to a larger room. The prosecutor called me the following week to inform me that the trial date had been set for 6 months. I attempted to concentrate on my lectures, but when the notice that I'd have to testify arrived 2 days later, I threw up straight in my dorm room. Albert held my hair back as I heaved into the garbage can, and Dr. Moreau spent the entire following session reminding me that I was stronger than I realized and that I had already survived the worst part, bisses. Chelsea from back home spotted me in the cereal section at a supermarket shop near college. She drew me into a strong hug before I could move away, telling me how much my mother missed me and how she looked dreadful without me. The guilt hit me like a blow in the stomach, and I abandoned my entire cart right in the aisle. I drove back to my flat, crying so hard that I couldn't see the road. 2 weeks later, things worsened. Claudia's lawyer filed a motion claiming that because I was mentally unwell, my testimony should be invalidated. They wanted all of my therapy records, every single session with Dr. Moreau, and anything private I'd ever said. Dr. Moreau sat me down and described what was going to happen, how they would try to use my PTSD diagnosis against me, and how they would twist things to make me appear insane. The judge limited what they could view, but Claudia's lawyer was still allowed to confront Dr. Moreau about my diagnosis in court. My former English instructor reached out on Facebook after learning about the case from another teacher. She recalls seeing me crying in the restroom after Claudia humiliated me in front of the entire cafeteria junior year. I remembered how I had begged her not to tell anyone since it would just make things worse. She offered to testify about what she had witnessed over the years. I began writing everything down in a private blog just to get it all out of my head. The words came out like poison being drawn from a wound. Page after page of memories I had attempted to forget. Albert read portions of it with my consent and then held me for an hour while I sobbed into his chest. A month later, my father sent me a letter through my lawyer. He was filing for divorce from my mother after she was arrested for assisting Claudia. He wrote that he had failed to protect me, but he still did not want Claudia to go to jail, that she was still his daughter, and that maybe we could all go to treatment together one day. I read it 3 times before throwing it away without responding. At our next meeting, the prosecutor showed me something that made my skin crawl. Security footage from a coffee shop near my hostel, the library, and the parking garage all show Claudia following me for weeks before the blackmail began. She'd been studying my calendar, calculating out when I'd be alone, and organizing everything like it was a sick game. The prosecution stated that the premeditation would make the allegations significantly more serious. I was sitting in my psychology course the next week when someone behind me laughed in a high, nasty tone that sounded exactly like Claudia. My chest tightened and I couldn't breathe or think, so I gathered my belongings and fled out of the room. I spent an hour in the bathroom attempting to calm my breathing, spraying cold water on my face and practicing the counting techniques Dr. Moreau taught me. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Moreau's office, staring at this light bar she was holding while she discussed how EMDR could help with trauma memories. She shifted the light back and forth as I imagined Claudia pulling my bunny's head off, and my gaze followed suit, and I started sobbing harder than I had in years. But the memory felt different afterward, like if I was viewing it through thick glass rather than experiencing it again. Aunt Susan called Albert the next day, crying because she'd been discussing the trial with her daughter Sophia, and Sophia broke down and told her that Claudia had cut up her wedding dress with scissors the night before her wedding 6 years ago, convincing everyone Sophia did it herself during a panic attack about getting married. Sophia had been in treatment ever since, believing she had experienced a breakdown, but now she knew Claudia had done it, and she wanted to testify, and Aunt Susan kept saying how sorry she was for not believing me. My scores began to improve after I discovered out how to compartmentalize legal information in my mind during class. And my economics professor approached me after I aced the exam and offered me a research assistant position for the following semester, which felt like the first typical positive thing to happen in months. A month later, the pre-trial hearing began. Even though I didn't have to go, I read all of the transcripts online, and Claudia's lawyer was attempting to get the whole thing thrown out, claiming it was a family issue rather than a criminal matter. However, the judge stated that the evidence of premeditation and the gravity of the conduct plainly placed it in criminal territory. I was headed to my statistics class on Tuesday morning when campus security hurried past me into the humanities building. I followed and noticed Marlene standing there with a huge poster board banner that stated, "Forgive your family," while students took pictures with their phones. Security seized her arms and she began screaming that I was hurting our family and that God would punish me for turning my back on blood. They carried her to their car as she continued to yell, and I subsequently found out she was detained again for breaking the restraining order. That delivery with the old rabbit appears to have arrived at the perfect time, just after Claudia rejected the plea agreement. Makes me question if Marlene is indeed behind it, or if someone else intended to convey a warning about what's to come. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor summoned me to prep sessions, where she forced me to practice answering questions while pretending to be Claudia's lawyer in an attempt to make me appear insane or malicious. And she kept interrupting me when I became too upset, urging me to take a deep breath and respond with facts. At one of these meetings at the courthouse, I came across a woman named Ashley crying in the washroom. And when I inquired whether she was okay, she claimed her sister had tormented her for 20 years and she was finally filing charges. And we exchanged contacts and began chatting every day because she understood what it was like when everyone told you to just forgive your family. Albert found a USB disk in a box of my old belongings from home, and when we plugged it in, it brought up all of my childhood home videos. And in every single one, Claudia was doing something mean while smiling at the camera, such as pinching me hard enough to make me cry, stepping on my toys, or pulling my hair while my parents were filming birthday parties or Christmas morning, completely focused on the camera and oblivious to what was going on right in front of them. Claudia's lawyer told the Columbus Dispatch a week before the trial that I was a troubled young woman looking for attention and fabricating stories about my loving sister. And by lunchtime, it was all over social media, with high school students taking sides. My campus support group also commented on the post, sharing their own stories of abusive siblings. Albert's mother, who works in social services, began calling around and located 3 different therapists who had treated people at Claudia's previous workplaces for workplace bullying. While they could not violate confidentiality to testify, they all admitted off the record that Claudia had a clear pattern of targeting one individual at each employment until that person departed or had a breakdown. Even though the therapists could not testify directly, the prosecutor stated that this information would help prove a trend. 2 weeks later, we were seated in the courthouse for jury selection, and I watched as person after person was grilled about their views on family. One woman was promptly removed after saying that families should always forgive one another regardless of what happened. Another guy was cut for saying that siblings argue all the time and that it is normal, so he was also cut. The prosecutor wanted people to understand that family members, like anyone else, may be abusers. Dr. Moreau scheduled an extra session for me 3 days before the experiment began, and something simply snapped while we were talking. I realized I'd spent my entire life keeping my folks from realizing how horrible things were with Claudia. I never told them the worst stuff since I didn't want to raise difficulties or force them to choose sides. I was so busy trying to be the good daughter who didn't make a scene that I let Claudia slowly ruin me. The night before the trial, I was in my hotel room with Albert, reviewing my notes, when my phone called from an unknown number. I answered, and my father's voice was slurred and inebriated, stating he wished I hadn't been born since none of this would have happened to their family. Albert grabbed the phone and hung up, leaving me shivering. The next morning, Elisa arrived at my hotel after flying in from California, where she had moved for employment. We remained up late that night, reading through our old yearbooks, and she pointed out photo after image of me attempting to avoid Claudia at school gatherings. She remembered how professors would assume we were just sisters when I would arrive to class with red eyes from sobbing. The first day of trial began with opening statements, and I felt awful watching Claudia sit there in this conservative gown she had never worn before. The prosecutor presented dates and examples to demonstrate 20 years of escalating abuse, but Claudia's counsel continued to refer to it as sibling rivalry that was exaggerated. Claudia genuinely dabbed her tears with a tissue, as if she were the victim here. The next day, they showed the graduation party film, and some jurors shifted uneasily in their seats as Claudia grabbed the microphone. Her counsel objected repeatedly, claiming that it was prejudiced, but the judge allowed it to be used as evidence of pattern conduct. During lunch recess, I was returning from the restroom when I noticed Claudia in the corridor. She looked right at me and flashed this charming, phony smile before mouthing the words, "I love you, sister," with a mocking look in her eyes that made my skin crawl. I had to hurry to the restroom and puke up. On day 2 of the trial, they called me to testify, and I sat in the witness chair, attempting to keep my voice firm. I told them about the bunny when I was 5 and how she looked me in the eyes while pulling off its head. I mentioned the necklace she flushed, the clothes she damaged, and the rumors she started. My voice only cracked once when I described finding my bunny's head in my backpack at school the next day, exactly where she had put it. Several jurors appeared to be upset by the story. Then came cross-examination, and Claudia's lawyer pressed me hard. He claimed that I was jealous of my successful older sister, as well as vengeful and possibly mentally unstable. He kept attempting to twist my remarks, but I just kept responding, "That's not true," and sticking to the truth as Dr. Moreau had taught me. He asked why I waited so long to report anything, and I explained that my parents had always told me it was just sister stuff. After I finished testifying, they called my old English teacher, Mrs. Keller, who had driven up from our hometown. She produced an old teaching diary in which she had written notes about finding me crying in the hallway on several occasions, always after seeing Claudia. She had dates and details regarding her concerns written down from years ago. The prosecutor called my cousin Monica next, and she looked so little as she walked to the witness stand, her hands quivering as she grabbed a tissue. Monica began about Claudia's wedding 3 years ago, when she was a bridesmaid, and how Claudia had ruined her dress the night before by pouring red wine on it while laughing. She burst into tears as she explained how Claudia convinced everyone at the wedding that Monica had gotten drunk and damaged her own dress out of envy. The prosecutor displayed images of the destroyed garment and text exchanges in which Claudia boasted about it to her pals. Monica's voice cracked as she revealed Claudia liked harming people, and some of the jury members took notes, while others looked horrified. After Monica stood down, the cybercrime detective entered the stand with a large folder of evidence and began outlining the internet harassment campaign in detail. He showed me IP addresses tracked back to Claudia's devices as well as timestamps, demonstrating she had been sending me abusive texts at all hours for months. My images were manipulated horribly on the bogus social media accounts she made, and she put them on sites I can't even explain. The detective demonstrated how complex and organized everything was, including spreadsheets that tracked when to deliver messages for maximum psychological impact. During the lunch break, I was sitting alone in the hallway when my father stepped up, appearing as if he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His suit was creased, and his eyes were red as he stood there staring at me before apologizing and admitting that he realizes what she is now. I didn't forgive him, but I nodded because what else could I do, given what had happened between us? When court began that afternoon, Claudia finally took the stand in her own defense, dressed in an innocent white frock as if she were a victim. She burst into tears and claimed I'd always been jealous of her and was making stuff up to get attention because I couldn't tolerate being the less successful sibling. Her lawyer asked her simple questions, and she responded with a beautiful voice I'd never heard her use before, blotting away phony tears. The jurors seemed to believe it until the prosecutor began cross-examining her and asking about the video from my graduation party. She tried to deny it at first, but when he showed the video of her uttering that horrific statement, her entire expression transformed. The prosecutor kept pushing and presenting evidence, and Claudia eventually snapped and screamed that I deserved it because I was constantly trying to make her appear bad. The entire courtroom fell silent, and I noticed jurors slump back in their seats as they finally saw the genuine Claudia beneath the act. The following day, character witnesses testified, and my teachers described how I had been a decent student who suddenly began missing courses when the harassment began. My manager at my university job remembered finding me crying in the storage area several times, and Albert mentioned the night terrors I was experiencing. Elisa gave me texts in which I begged her to help me find out what I had done wrong to make Claudia so angry. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep and kept replaying Claudia's testimony in my thoughts. Even though I knew the truth, the ease and convincingness with which she lied made me doubt myself at first, because that is what years of gaslighting do to you. I stared at the ceiling till morning, reflecting on how she had almost convinced me that I was the problem again, just like when we were kids. The fifth day of trial was dedicated to closing arguments, during which the prosecutor detailed the progression from childhood bullying to criminal harassment and stalking. He displayed a timeline of how things worsened after I severed touch, emphasizing Claudia's lack of remorse despite overwhelming proof. The defense lawyer contended that family dysfunction and sibling rivalry had gotten out of control rather than criminal action that required jail time. While the jury deliberated, I sat in the corridor with Albert holding my hand, Elisa on the other side, and Aunt Susan across from us. 20 years of facts suddenly making sense must be like discovering that your childhood house was constructed on a poisonous waste dump. Explains a lot, but doesn't make it any less dreadful. Susan glanced at me and said, "Whatever happens, you've already won by breaking free." I wasn't sure I believed her yet. We'd been waiting for 2 hours when we heard shouts from outside, and security officers rushed past us to the courthouse entrance. Marlene had returned, violating her restraining order once more, and was yelling at reporters that I had destroyed our family while attempting to push through security to get inside. The guards held her arms as she attempted to spring at me through the doorway, shouting that I was a liar who had turned everyone against them. The officers arrived within minutes and detained her for violating the restraining order, while the bailiff instructed us to return inside. We spent the remainder of the day sitting in the corridor, waiting for news, but none came. The next morning, the prosecutor found us in the same position and informed us that the jury had requested to examine the graduation video and all of the cybercrime evidence again, indicating that they were taking it seriously. I couldn't eat anything, so Albert kept bringing me water that I couldn't drink as we watched other cases being handled and resolved around us. Dr. Moreau arrived around noon and sat with us for a bit, telling me that whatever occurred, I had already won by standing up to them, that Claudia no longer defined me. Something about hearing this made me understand she was correct, since for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of my sister. The third day began the same way, with us sitting in those rough plastic chairs when the bailiff appeared and announced that the jury had returned. My hands began to shake so badly that I could barely stand up. As we returned to the courtroom and saw the jury take their places, the foreman stepped up carrying a piece of paper, and I gripped Albert's hand so tightly that I thought I'd break it. Guilty of all counts, including harassment, blackmail, and witness intimidation. Claudia's expression changed from smug to astonished to absolute wrath in roughly 3 seconds. The judge began discussing scheduling, but Claudia sprang up and lunged across the defense table at me, yelling that I had ruined her life. 2 court officials apprehended her, but she continued to fight and kick, making threats about what she would do to me if she got free. The judge pounded his gavel and added contempt of court to her charges as she was carried out, still screaming. He set sentence for 6 weeks later, and the prosecutor indicated that with multiple felonies and her current behavior, she faced 2 to 5 years in prison. Outside the courts, reporters waited, and I gave them a brief statement about how I hoped this would help other abuse survivors seek justice, even if the offender was family. Then we proceeded to Albert's house, where I just broke down and screamed for what seemed like hours while his mother made tea and his father ordered pizza, and they just let me weep. My support group hosted a modest celebration for me the following week, and one woman stated I had given them all hope that they could stand up to their own abusers. A week later, I received a letter from Aiden with a check for my whole education fund, which Marlene had attempted to withdraw before the restraining order was issued. He wrote that he had moved out, filed for divorce, and began therapy, and that he was aware that he had failed me but was working to improve. 6 weeks later, we returned to court for Claudia's sentence, and she received 3 years in prison, 2 years probation, and required psychological treatment. She had to be forcefully hauled out of the courtroom, yelling that I would pay for this and that she would make me sorry when she left. The prosecutor filed for a permanent restraining order that same day, and the judge granted it right away. Claudia could never contact or come within 500 feet of me again once she was released from prison. If she broke it, she'd be sent back to jail. I could now breathe without looking over my shoulder. During our following appointment, Dr. Moreau helped me comprehend how I really felt. She suggested I was mourning the family I should have had rather than the one I ended up with. That made perfect sense because I was not sad about losing them. I was unhappy because I never had real parents or a real sibling in the first place. 2 weeks later, Marlene issued a letter through her lawyer stating that she had entirely disowned me. She was removing me from her will and deleting me from the family as if I never existed. Albert and Elisa came over that night, and we lit the letter in my backyard fire pit. Watching those cruel comments crumble to ash was liberating. 2 months later, I went to the courthouse and formally changed my last name to Smith, Albert's mother's maiden name. His family had basically adopted me anyway, and they were overjoyed about it. The paperwork was like removing chains I'd worn my entire life. When I returned to campus for sophomore year, everything changed. My grades were excellent. I received the research position I desired and helped to expand the abuse survivors support group. We increased our membership from 5 to over 30. Trauma no longer controlled me. Aunt hosted Thanksgiving that year for me, Albert, his parents, his sister, and the cousin who testified for me. We cooked and laughed together, and no one screamed, threw objects, or delivered hateful words. Albert's father raised a toast to the chosen family and new beginnings. I shed happy tears for the first time in years. A few weeks later, I contributed an anonymous story about sibling abuse to the university newspaper. Within days, my inbox was swamped with messages from other students who shared their own experiences. Some had never informed anyone before. I organized a weekly coffee meetup for anyone who wants to discuss. During one of my therapy appointments in December, Dr. Moreau pointed out that I hadn't addressed Claudia once in the previous 3 meetings. She was correct. I hadn't even considered her. The incessant fear and anxiety had finally subsided. Aunt contacted in January to let me know Aiden had reached out to her. He had moved into a modest apartment, begun therapy, and was attending support groups for parents who allowed abuse. He wanted her to tell me he was working on himself and would understand if I never saw him again. Maybe someday we can try to reconstruct something, but not now or soon. By the spring semester, Albert and I had moved into a tiny apartment near campus. We sat on our secondhand couch one night, figuring out our junior year schedules and summer internship opportunities. My phone stayed silent the entire time. No furious texts, guilt trips, threats, or dread. I'd created a life that Claudia couldn't touch, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me. For the first time since I was a child with my teddy bunny, I felt absolutely protected. You're single. You don't need a whole place. My sister wanted my home for her family. I refused. She called me selfish and ended up drowning in bills. I am the older brother, 29, and my younger sister, who is now 27, has always been the golden kid. Allow me to take you through the entire narrative from the beginning. Here's the thing. My parents had me while they were still sorting out their professions. 3 years later, my sister was born. It was evident from the start who was the favored. My parents were polite to me, but once my sister arrived, everything seemed to revolve around her. People noticed it too. Relatives would comment on how much attention she received, but my parents would simply laugh it off. As children, the preference was clear. My birthdays were tiny, with homemade cake, whereas my sisters had booked locations and large guest lists. When I asked why, my father responded, "You're older now. I was 8, she was 6, toys were the same. I saved months for a skateboard." She mentioned wanting a bike and got one by the weekend. My mother's explanation was always, "She's younger, let her enjoy it." School also made it plain. I received high marks and quickly found a nice job. My sister brought home average work or a painting and put it on the fridge. I took second place in a science fair. My father did not attend since he had work. She had a single line in a school play, and both parents left work early to attend. My mom's excuse is that she gets nervous. She requires support. I was a good kid who remained out of trouble, did well in school, and helped at home. But my parents pretended that I didn't require attention. I was fine, although my sister was always the special one, or baby. I was continually told, "You're older, you should understand," or "She's younger, let her have it," as if my sole responsibility was to support her. By middle school, the pattern had mostly been established. My sister was at the heart of everything. I was only there to help out and not complicate matters. At that age, you begin to notice the little things more, and there were plenty. In 7th school, I wanted to participate in a scientific competition and build a little solar-powered car, but there was a cost and supplies required. When I requested at dinner, my father said it was too expensive, and my mother said I should forgo it. A week later, my sister registered for a dancing camp that cost twice as much, and they paid without hesitation. I ended up constructing a basic version out of scraps in my garage. I couldn't compete, but my teacher was impressed that I tried. That's when I realized that if I wanted something, I had to do it myself. However, home life was about more than just money. It was how they treated us. If my sister made a mess, I was expected to clean it. If something went missing, it was presumed that I was responsible. She once left an open juice box on the couch, which discolored the fabric. My mother called me from my room and urged me to tidy things up. I said it wasn't me. She commented, "I know, but she's tired. Just do it." That was natural. She also had a propensity of talking back. She would quarrel, roll her eyes, and slam the doors. My parents dubbed it attitude. If I did something like that, it was considered disrespectful, and I'd lose privileges. There were occasions when my father would take me aside and say things like, "She's your little sister. You have to keep the peace. Don't provoke her." It didn't matter who started it. It was always up to me to smooth things out. At school, I began to notice how my life differed from that of some of my friends. My friend's parents attended his basketball games, assisted with projects, and inquired about his academic progress. At our house, most talks with me were orders. Take out the trash. Help your sister with her homework. Do not stay out too late. My sister was continually asking questions and giving praise. How was your day? What would you want for dinner? You did exceptionally well. By the age of 16, I had ceased expecting anything from my parents and instead focused on myself. I cut lawns, took odd jobs, saved money, and bought my own belongings. My sister still got everything handed to her, and she even quipped, "I'm the favorite." My parents smiled. I kept quiet, knowing that speaking up wouldn't change anything. By the time high school began, I had ceased asking for things. I rarely went on school field excursions, since I knew the answer would be no. The class once traveled to a science facility outside of town, which cost about $30. I did not even bring it up. I used to believe that money was limited, but then I saw my parents take my sister shopping for clothes or electronics. Once, I overheard my mother on the phone with a family acquaintance. She responded, "He's fine. He doesn't need much. She's the one we have to focus on. She's more sensitive." I think that's how they perceived me, someone who did not need assistance or attention. But I did. I've just learned not to anticipate it. By sophomore year, I had started looking for ways to make my own money. I'd shovel snow, mow the grass, and walk the dogs. It wasn't a lot, but it gave me some control. If I desired a book or a game, I'd buy it for myself. My parents thought it was responsible, and they expressed their pride in my independence. They didn't realize it was because I had no other options. Meanwhile, my sister kept getting what she asked for. If she wanted to join a new club, they would pay. If she wanted to quit something, they'd say that was fine. She, too, enjoyed showing off. She'd tell me, "Mom and Dad said I'm special." I'd dismiss it, but it stuck. One last thing from that period. There was a career expo at the school. I wanted to go since some tech businesses were coming. It was a Saturday event. I asked my father for a ride. He stated he was busy driving my sister to a friend's party. My mother told me to just ride the bus. I went anyway, but the bus route was sluggish, so I missed the first part. When I went home, my sister was telling me how much fun she had at the party, and my parents were beaming as they listened. I didn't even mention the fare. By the time of high school, I had ceased expecting them to be present for anything important to me. I kept my head down, worked when I could, and intended to leave as soon as possible. By the time I graduated high school, I realized I couldn't rely on my parents for anything. They had covered part of my essential education fees, but anything else I required came out of my own wallet. My sister had just turned 17 and already owned a used automobile that my parents had purchased for her. I asked if I might borrow it for prom, but the answer was no since she might need it. I ended up taking a ride from a friend. It didn't concern me much at the time. I'd learned that I needed to manage things on my own. I was accepted into a decent state college, nothing spectacular, but solid. And it was in another city, which was significant for me. I desired space. My parents made a big fuss about how they couldn't afford much help and that I needed to be responsible. I was offered financial aid and a tiny scholarship. They paid for my second semester's books, but I covered the rest, including lodging, food, and transportation, with a combination of part-time employment and savings from mowing lawns and doing odd jobs in high school. My sister received a large good luck supper when she began community college later. When I departed for school, it was only a quick goodbye. The first year was difficult, but I learned a lot. I worked evenings at a coffee shop close to campus. On weekends, I took shifts in a bookshop. My grades were consistent, but I was unable to attend as many parties or hang out as some of my classmates. I did not mind. It was fantastic to know that I earned what I had. I had a strict budget. I kept a notebook with every expense, even to the smallest snack. When I wanted a new phone or a better laptop, I planned months in advance. I rapidly discovered that if money is not tracked, it evaporates quickly. Meanwhile, my sister remained the focus of my parents' attention. She transferred programs twice before deciding school wasn't for her. She lived at home without paying rent. They purchased her a modern car because the previous one was unreliable. I found out about it when my mother called to ask for help setting up the Bluetooth. It did not surprise me. During family dinners, she would whine about being bored or wishing to travel. My parents would nod and say, "We'll figure something out." When I stated that I was taking 16 classes and working 30 hours a week, they'd just respond, "You've always been good at managing things." My sophomore year, I got a better job. One of my professors assisted me in obtaining an employment as an assistant at a small technology business in downtown. It paid more than the coffee business, and the owner did not mind my class schedule. I kept the bookstore shifts on weekends. Most days, I left my apartment at 8 o'clock a.m. I came back after dark, but my savings grew. I created my first genuine bank account and began contributing to a tiny emergency fund. I recall sitting at my tiny desk, proud of the $600 I had managed to keep unspoiled. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. The absence of support from my family no longer bothered me. It became normal. I rarely called home, save for birthdays and holidays. My parents would inquire how school was doing, then discuss my sister's current plans. She worked at a shop for a month before quitting because she disliked the hours. My mother told me she just needed to find her passion. I was tempted to mention that I didn't much enjoy working double shifts, but I kept quiet. By junior year, I had streamlined everything. I moved into a cheaper apartment with 2 roommates, sold my old bike, and used the money I had saved to buy a secondhand automobile. It was not fancy, but it was dependable. Every dime counts. I found freelancing employment online, simple data input, coaching, or anything that pays. I also began reading about investment. Nothing major, just fundamentals like saving, budgeting, and compound interest. I didn't have much, but I enjoyed the thought of being prepared. My parents organized a lavish celebration for my sister's 19th birthday. She received a new laptop and a week-long trip to the coast with her pals, which they paid for. I wrote her a simple note that read, "Happy birthday, no party for me when I turn 21. I celebrated by working a shift and getting takeout with a friend. It did not hurt. It was simply the way things were. My parents set various standards for us. They always have. I just made sure to stay focused. By the time I was about to graduate, I'd saved enough for a deposit on an apartment and had paid off my tiny student debts. I didn't immediately notify my parents since I didn't want to hear comparisons or comments. When I mentioned it during a phone call, my father responded, "Good, now maybe you can help your sister when she needs it." That line resonated with me. It was not intended as a joke. They actually saw me as her backup plan. That was when I resolved that whatever I made would be for myself. I would not let their priorities influence mine. Well, after graduation, I remained in the same place where I attended school. The computer company where I worked part-time offered me a full-time position. It wasn't a lot of money, but for a 23-year-old just out of college, it was adequate. I moved into a better apartment with 1 roommate, kept my car running, and began saving money each month. I had a plan. Continue to work hard, save money, and eventually buy my own place. At home, nothing has changed. My sister, at 21, was still living with my parents. She did not return to school after dropping out of community college. She worked a few short-term jobs, quit when she didn't like the hours, and complained about not receiving enough help. My parents treated her as if she were under siege. Every time I called, the conversation always revolved around her. "Your sister is figuring things out. She's stressed. Be nice to her. She's sensitive." Around this time, the rudeness became more noticeable. When I visited for the holidays, she treated me as if I were a visitor in her home. She'd leave her belongings everywhere, make disparaging remarks about my clothing or automobile. "Wow, you're still driving that old thing. Do you even have time to live your life working all the time?" If I ignored her, she would press, "Why are you so quiet? Are you too good for us right now?" One Thanksgiving, I brought a little basket of food and drinks. Nothing spectacular, just something to give. She rolled her eyes and said, "Thanks, but Mom already covered everything. You really don't have to show off." My parents didn't say anything to her. My father actually told me, "Don't be offended. She jokes like that." When she started seeing a guy, things got worse. She bragged about how supportive he was and how they were going to do great things. At one dinner, she made a point of mentioning, "He doesn't just work all the time like some people." My mother chuckled. My father said, "She just wants you to loosen up." I kept my distance, but I recognized the trend. They minimized all of my wonderful work. Whatever she accomplished, they exaggerated. Around that time, I received my first promotion. My manager summoned me to his office and offered me a team lead role. I was proud of it. I planned a modest dinner with close friends and sent invitations to my parents and sister. They said they will attempt to arrive. The day arrived. I reserved a good site. Nothing fancy, but I wanted to celebrate. Everyone but my family showed up. I called my mother thereafter. She corrected herself. "Oh, sorry, your sister got a new certification and we went out with her. It was some online class certificate, nothing career-changing, but they acted like it was a major milestone." My dad interrupted. "You know how she gets." We were unable to reject it. That night, I realized I had stopped expecting them to show up for me. Despite the home drama, work was satisfying. I kept moving higher, saving more, and looked for methods to advance. I learned to avoid unnecessary expenses. I started reading more about money, investments, and property. My weekends were spent relaxing, meeting friends, and checking listings. My long-term goal was straightforward. I want to own my own apartment before I turn 31. My parents' calls remained the same. If they contacted me, it was typically about my sister. "Could you help her with her resume? She needs help with a loan. She's thinking of launching a business. Perhaps you can guide her." If I stated I was busy, they would become cold. My mother once told me, "Don't forget where you came from." I didn't dispute. I just continued doing my own thing. During one visit home, I eventually confronted them. My sister had been moaning about her employment, claiming she deserved more money. My mother turned to me and said, "Maybe you can talk to your boss about hiring her." I responded, "She doesn't have the experience. I worked for this." My father scowled and said, "Don't be selfish. Family helps family." My sister smirked. "You act like you're some big deal. It's just a job." That night, I drove back to my apartment and made a choice. I would never let them decide what I owed. I was not harsh about it. I simply stopped disclosing details. I didn't tell them how much I earned, where I invested, or what I had planned. When they inquired, I kept things short. It wasn't fury, but rather strategy. By the age of 26, my financial situation had improved beyond my expectations. I had a healthy bank account, a dependable automobile, and no debt. My sister was still living at home. She had a newer automobile, which my parents helped her buy, and they paid for some of her costs. She'd make online comments about her independence, but I knew the truth. She eventually totaled the automobile. When my parents reminded me that I should keep an eye out for her, I simply nodded. I was not going to argue. I had bigger plans and did not need their approval. Every snide remark and overlooked moment only made it clearer. They were not going to change, and neither was I. By the time I was 27, I had established a good routine. Work was consistent, and my savings finally looked like something. I kept my spending modest and said no to many things. My buddies called me stingy, but I knew what I was doing. I wanted to own something before turning 31. I began to look seriously at places. I spent my weekends researching listings, meeting agents, and crunching numbers. I wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just a tidy, stable apartment in a good location. After months of searching, I discovered it. 3 bedrooms, plenty of light, and near to work. The price was reasonable, and I could afford the down payment. Signing those papers felt like crossing the finish line. I did not inform my family right away. I waited until I held the keys in my hand. Then I sent a group text featuring a snapshot of myself in front of the building. Finally, I have my own place. It took a bit, but here we are. The responses were predictable. My mother answered, "Congrats. When are you having us over?" My father wrote, "Good job. Your sister will want to see it too." My sister responded, "Finally, it took you long enough." I invited them to a weekend lunch. I prepared, kept things basic, and gave them a tour. My mom instantly commented on how light and open it was and how ideal it would be for a young family. My father inquired about the 3rd bedroom, guest room, and office. My sister interrupted before I could respond. "It's obviously wasted space. Imagine a crib in there." I cracked a joke. "Good thing I bought it for me, not for you to play dollhouse." She rolled her eyes. "You don't even have anyone. It's just you. Kind of selfish to keep a whole place like this to yourself." My father gave me a look as if I should ignore it. I did not. "Yeah, I worked 3 jobs and skipped vacations so I could selfishly buy something with my own money. Shocking, right?" My mother shifted the subject, but I recognized the tone. They were impressed, but it seemed like they couldn't give me full credit. They inquired about furniture costs, and then my father added, "Well, at least it's in a good spot, easy to sell when you upgrade. Maybe your sister can use it if she needs something short term." I laughed again. "Yes, if she has market rent and a signed lease." They didn't like that. My mother responded, "You're so sarcastic. We're just saying families help each other." Exactly. I helped myself because no one else was offering. They fell silent after that. Lunch was fine, but the comments continued. My sister would send texts like, "When I get my own place, it's going to be bigger." Or, "Nice apartment, could use more color though." I would just give a thumbs up or say, "Great, let me know when that happens." Months later, during another family dinner, things flared up again. My sister was discussing how pricey everything were. She complained about rent and gas, saying, "It must be nice to have a free place." I replied, "It is not free." "Banks enjoy receiving monthly payments," my father interjected. "She just means you don't have to worry about moving. It's easier for you." "Yeah," I replied. My sister glared. "It's easier when you plan ahead and don't quit every job you get." "You think you're better because you bought a box with windows?" I asked. "Better than complaining about a box I don't own." My mother urged us to stop. "You two are always at each other's throats. Your sister is just stressed." "She's always stressed," I explained. "Maybe that's why you keep paying for her stuff." My father exclaimed sharply, "Enough! We help her because she needs it." "Right," I said, "and I managed because no one helped me. Got it." The room fell silent. My sister said something about my being selfish. I just stated that if being selfish implies not relying on your parents at the age of 25, you are guilty. Despite the anxiety, I did not ask them for anything. I did not bring up my finances. I stayed focused on my job. Everything was going nicely. Meanwhile, my sister remained adrift. She worked a series of temporary jobs and blogged online about how difficult the economy was. Every time I went home, my parents talked about her plans and lofty dreams, and they rarely asked about mine. I didn't care anymore. I was confident in my ability. However, the clues did not cease. My mother would suggest, "When you settle down, maybe your sister could stay at your place for a while." My father quipped, "Hope you got a spare key." My sister giggled, "Yeah, you should keep it clean for when I need it." I gave the same response each time. Not happening. I worked for it. One night, my father called unexpectedly. My sister needed somewhere to stay after a split. He asked if she may stay at my place for a few weeks. I said, "No, she's your sister." He said, "She's also an adult." I responded, "She's got 2 parents and a bus pass. She'll be fine." He didn't like that. "You've changed." "No," I replied. "I just stopped being the backup plan." I could feel the sting, but I didn't feel guilty. I was clear from the beginning. What I built was mine. They had several years to treat me like family. They chose to treat me as if I were a support staff member. Now I was only returning the same energy. Months later, I had everything running just as I intended. Work was steady. I had savings. My space was properly decorated and felt like mine. My sister, meantime, remained at home. She had 3 jobs and a brief relationship that ended horribly. My parents continued to treat her as if she were frail, whereas I was the responsible one. Then came the family BBQ. It was late July. Everyone was present. Parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. I arrived with some drinks and sides. My sister arrived last, arms around her lover. The entire family surrounded her as if she were the guest of honor. 2/3 of the way through, she stood up with a wide smile. "I have news," she announced, raising her glass. "We're having a baby." Everyone shouted, hugged her, and congratulated her lover. I approached her and said, "Congrats, I hope you're ready for no sleep." She smirked. "Well, I'll have a lot of help, right?" I didn't give it much thought. Then the night went on. Then my aunt inquired, "So, are you still planning a wedding?" My sister replied, "Yes, but the timeline is complicated now." She turned to me and smiled overly warmly. "Actually, this is the perfect time to bring this up. I've been thinking about your apartment. It would be the perfect place for us. Close to everything. Plenty of space for the baby." I was nearly laughing, thinking it was a prank. "Good thing I bought it for myself, not for a lease." She scowled. "I am serious. We can't stay with Mom and Dad forever. I need a safe haven, and you have that second room you don't even use." "You're correct," I answered. "It's for my office and my stuff. It's crazy how people use rooms in their own homes." She rolled her eyes. "Come on, you don't even have a family. It's just you. This would really help me out." "I worked 3 jobs for years to get it. Maybe you could try that method." My mom got involved. "She's asking because she needs it. You're single. You can wait a little while to get another one." She was staring at me. Wait, you want me to hand over the place I bought because she's pregnant? My dad responded, she's starting a family. That's more important right now. You'll understand when you have kids. I shake my head. So all those years I was on my own, working, paying rent, saving, none of that counted. But she gets pregnant, and suddenly my work belongs to her. My sister's arms are crossed. Don't make it a big deal. You can rent somewhere else for a year or 3. We'll take good care of your place. I laughed. Yeah, because you're famous for taking good care of things like that job you quit after 4 weeks or the car you totaled. Wow, she remarked with a loud voice. So, you're going to hold that over me forever? I thought family helped each other. They do, I informed you. When it's a 3-way street, not when it's a 1-way handout. My mother's expression stiffened. You always have to bring up the past. She's asking for help during a hard time. Hard time was all I responded. They made a decision. I did not sign anything. I am not their safety net. My father's voice increased. Don't talk like that. She's your sister. Show some respect. I got up. Respect works both ways. Respect my work, money, and home. The table fell silent. My sister started crying. You're so selfish. You've always been like this. It's just one thing and you can't do it for me. One thing? You've had everything since you were a kid. The parties, the car, the attention. I got lectures. Now you want my place? She grew furious. Fine, keep your stupid apartment. Don't expect us at your next big moment. We won't bother. Trust me, I told you. I stopped expecting you years ago. My mother murmured something about my being cold. My father shook his head as if I were a disappointment. I scooped up my belongings. I came here to eat a burger, not to be shamed for owning something. I'll see you around. On my way out, my sister called after me. You're going to regret this when you're alone. I turned and answered, better alone than broke and bitter. That was the last time I attempted to be polite about it. The texts began arriving the next day. My father wrote, she cried all night. I hope you're happy. My mother said, we raised you better than this. My sister sent a wall of texts about how I wrecked her pregnant pleasure. I did not respond. 3 days later, my sister called to say, fine, I don't want it anymore, but you could at least give us money to get a place. I chuckled. You want me to pay you because I said no to giving you my home? That's creative. She left a message. Following that, the family group chat became sour. My parents acted distant. They implied that I had become haughty. I didn't care. I had a job, savings, and my own space. I had worked for it. I was not going to give it up because someone else couldn't handle theirs. Following the gathering, I decided to draw a hard line. I didn't react to any additional guilt texts. My sister remained angry. My parents were cold. At first, I believed everything would calm down. Instead, they doubled down. They started telling family about how selfish I was. A cousin messaged me, what's going on? Your mom said you wouldn't let your sister stay with you. I once said, I bought my own home after years of working. They think it's theirs, which is not the case. Most of my cousins agreed with me. Some people commented, yeah, your parents have always babied her. That was lovely to hear, but I didn't need it. Work was my secure place. I put in more hours, took on tasks, and was noticed. A few months later, my manager contacted me about another promotion. It came with a raise and increased flexibility. I decided to celebrate, but this time, I did not invite my parents or sister. I hosted a little celebration with friends and a few supportive relatives. Everyone else sent their congratulations. My parents did not even text. My sister made a comment online about families forgetting who important, which I ignored. Then things changed. My parents began hinting at financial issues. I learned from my cousin that they were covering several of my sister's expenditures. She left another job throughout her pregnancy because it was too stressful. They were paying a portion of her rent, auto insurance, and hospital bills. My father even tapped into his retirement savings. I kept out of it. Every time I received a cryptic text like, your sister's having a hard time, I answered, hope she figures it out. A month before the baby was due, my mother called me for the first time in weeks. She inquired, could you just loan your sister a little, just until things settle? Responded, you mean give her money so she doesn't have to manage her own life for 3 months? She responded, you've changed. You used to care. I responded, I learned who cared about me. It wasn't you. She left a message. The baby arrived. Everyone acted as if it were a royal occasion. I sent a tiny gift with a brief message. "Congrats! Hope the baby's healthy." My sister said, "Wow, that's it." I left it on read. As the months passed, it became evident that things were not going smoothly for them. The boyfriend had inconsistent work. The bills piled up. They moved in with my parents. When money became tight, the wedding preparations fell through. I learned this from my aunt, who told me, "Your parents are stressed. Your father is covering everything." I just said, "They made their decisions." I was not gloating. It was only a fact. Then came the moment that decided it for me. My father called again, his tone milder. He remarked, "We may have been too harsh on you. We didn't realize how much you did on your own." He asked if I could contribute a modest amount each month until they were back on their feet. I nearly laughed. "So, after years of hearing, 'You're fine, you can handle it,' I'm now meant to carry you? No thanks." He stated it was family. I replied, "Exactly. Family supports, not drains. I learned that from you." That concluded the call. The real satisfaction arrived later. My company hosted a large end-of-year function. They recognized certain staff for significant contributions. I was one of them. My photo was displayed on a screen, and my name was mentioned in front of the entire company and some local media. They awarded me a substantial bonus. I shared one photo online of myself beaming with the trophy. I did not tag anyone. The comments poured in. Friends, co-workers, former classmates. My sister didn't say anything. My mother liked the post but never commented. My dad remained silent. When I saw them at a Christmas dinner months later, the vibe was different. They were nice and quieter than normal. My sister rarely spoke to me. My father inquired about work in a neutral tone. My mother talked largely about the baby. Nobody mentioned the apartment. Nobody asked for money. It was as if they already knew the answer. My sister whispered, "You must feel pretty proud." I responded, "Not proud, just glad I stopped waiting for anyone's approval." My father shook his head slightly, but did not disagree. My mother hugged me swiftly and murmured, "Drive safe." That was it. Looking back, I don't believe I ever received the apology I deserved. But I have something better: distance, control, and proof that I can construct anything without them. The child who was instructed to understand while his sister had all the attention grew into a guy who did not require their attention at all. They are still the same folks. She is still entitled. They are still enabling. But none of this matters anymore. I've got my place, my job, and my peace. When I lock my door at night, I recall that every piece of furniture, every payment paid, and every inch of that apartment were the result of my own efforts.